we are looking at development at the local government area. Now, the federal government says it is proposing a 3.13% increase in revenue allocation to local governments as a means to increase development in the rural areas. Now, this proposal translates to a reduction of 2.03% in the federal government's allocation, while state governments will lose about 1.1% in favor of the local governments. This development is coming on the heels of the ongoing stakeholders engagement carried out by the Revenue Mobilization, Allocation and Fiscal Commission on the review of the country's revenue sharing formula. Now, in the current formula, the federal government gets about 52.68%, state governments also get 26.72%, while local government gets the least of 20.6%. Well, to discuss this and much more, I have joining me virtually the head of retail investment, Chapel Hill Denham, Ayodeji Ebo. Good to have you on the show today.
Good afternoon, and thanks for having me.
Now, let's start off with the integral role of development at the local government area. Why, before we now start looking at a shift being proposed here in terms of revenue allocation, why do you see this as one of the most fundamental routes to ensure we have development for greater economic recovery?
Thank you. So if we go back and look at the reason why local governments were formed, we have about 774 local governments in Nigeria. It's because of getting close to the people. So they believe it is easier to access or build services closer to the people. So local government was set up for the government to be able to have direct access to the people. But when you look at in terms of the impact in the past few years, you will discover that the populace are not really feeling their impact. So in terms of the objective, we've not been seeing that impact across the country due to a lot of the structural issues, even from the state level. So it's really important to understand that the major reason why local governments were formed have not even been achieved. Before even going into the allocation of funds that goes into them, most of currently the funds that goes to them are really controlled by the state. So there's a limit to what the local government can achieve given this current structure. So beyond looking at increasing the revenue, the allocation that goes to the local government, there needs to be a rejig of the structure. In the rule or in the policy, there's what we call the financial autonomy that most local governments have. But we know in practical terms, it's really not applicable because of the structure the state governors or the state government have put in place, which has handicapped the performance or the ability of the local government to impact the populace.
Looking at this 3.13%, this is a voluminous shift that we are likely going to see and also help redefine the level of development we see at the local government area. But looking at following the money, like you made mention of, the changes we've seen over the past few years have not necessarily been impactful. What do you think would be the assertion that with this new shift we'll likely see more? Because in the area of missing elements of following the money and implementation index and much more, it's quite difficult to assess how much of development we have, even if we have a 50% share. That is also one of the biggest problems we have at state levels and even at federal levels. We cannot necessarily quantify the impact, irrespective of whatever allocation is gotten. Do you see this as a bigger problem, irrespective of the shift in percentages?
Yes, thanks. I think you were very apt with your comments on that. So the shifting does not solve the problem if we don't look at the fundamental problem. So currently, based on the current allocation of 20.6%, and we are not seeing that major impact in terms of development. You look at the health sector, the health services, the primary health care center that should be taken care of. Then even some of the roads within the local government region, how many of them are being fixed in terms of providing water resources. So there are a lot of major gaps, and if we don't uh, take care of these major hurdles, it will still come back to the same thing. So when you look at the current structure, for most of the state governments, you see that they appoint caretakers, which you can say will be the loyalists of the governors. So most times, even the 20% that is allocated that should go to the local government really doesn't get to them. So what we would see that I feel that would happen is that with the increase of 3%, that means that the allocation to the states indirectly have increased, because the states, which currently has about 26.7%, which will reduce to about 25%, will now have additional 23% from the local government. So I believe that our focus here should be, how do we want to make the local government more effective? How will the people feel their impact more before we even talk about allocation? And I like what you said, that even if we increase the allocation to the local government by 50%, we are not going to be excited about that, because we won't see any major impact based on this current structure. Though it varies from state to state, but we can, if you monitor the progress that we are seeing at the local government level, you will discover that there's really nothing happening at that level. For some states, there's been no election for years, so it's not the people staying within that area that elects those that are even governing them, and it's based on appointment. So if we don't look at those underground issues, then I don't think that there's really nothing to cheer about regarding this increase of 3%.
Now, also looking at the conversation from the bigger perspective, which you just painted right now, when we see this bigger pool move to the local government area indirectly, this also fuels the development at state level, because the local governments fall under states, and then definitely with the states falling under the bigger umbrella of federal activities. Now, when we are looking at issues around primary health care, affordable education, infrastructure development, social welfare programs, getting to the root of the matter beyond these allocations, what sort of change as well do you expect to see in the body language of the authorities at this level? Because like we've also mentioned, it's still the same body language mimicked at the different strata of government.
Okay, thanks. I think apart from the increase in the allocation, what we should be pushing for is more transparency from the states and the local level. You see, like currently we see a lot of information around the federal budget. We see the allocation, we see the projects. So we believe that that form of transparency should also dovetail to the states as well as the local government level. So on a yearly basis, as we see the federal government present their budget and give us a breakdown, we should be able to see the breakdown of the budget by the state as well as even the local government level. So there should be a condition to assess this, meeting those conditions, which is providing transparency. How have you spent the few allocations that have been released to you? We're not saying control what they spend it on, but there needs to be a bit of check and balances for us to be able to see that impact. You know, most times we always focus on the federal government budget, but we hardly see a platform where you can aggregate even the budget of the 35 states and the FCT, and if we can also even aggregate that of the 774 local governments, we would see that once we begin to get account of that, we'll be able to bring more accountability. So there needs to be a better structure to provide transparency beyond just increasing the allocation of the funds.
Let's now look at the next strata of this conversation now, from the local government level to now looking at the state government now. One of the biggest conversation is the fact that we are seeing some level of nonchalant attitude in terms of state governors not really taking the bull by the horn in terms of economic agenda, and this heavy reliance on allocations is just not the best approach. In terms of states now thinking outside the box, looking at emerging markets, utilizing the resources that are there, human resources and then other resources alike, how do you see things shaping up now that we're forced to think outside the box within regional areas? Take, for example, the Southwest region. Because of insecurity, we are now forced to think about new food hubs. We're now forced to think about intermodal means of transportation and a whole lot more. How do you see the shift in narrative forcing the governors to now think, really, and act?
Okay, thanks. I feel that in terms of the current structure, there's really nothing forcing the governors to change that structure. But speaking to what we would expect that should be, is that we should begin to see how we want to harness resources within the local government and the state level. Currently, most of the strategies to drive the economy of that state is being driven from the state level. But assuming most of the local governments have also such power and autonomy, and those resources or the allocations are getting to them, it will also empower them to be able to have an independent mind to come up with a blueprint of how they can turn around, how they can improve their community, improve their local government. Even if not all, even if you have 20 to 30% of the local government trying to implement policies that will improve standard of living of their community, we'll begin to see that major change, we'll begin to see that major drive, and that would impact on really the standard of living as well as the cost of living of the population within that community. So take, for instance, if you see the community being able to have resources, maybe we talk about agri now, and they're able to go into significant cultivation of a particular crop, and most of the exports or most of those crop produce are coming out from that particular local government. And in terms of the tax or the internally generated revenue from those particular items, grows very significantly and is able to improve on power, is able to improve on water resources. There will be significant migration to that state, and as a result, you begin to build a very strong community. The taxes within that particular local government would increase, and other local government would see, and that would drive them to also continue to see what do they have within their area, within their region, what kind of minerals do we have, what can we add value to. These are some of the things that we will need to look at, and they can also collaborate with the state government. You see, like state government sometimes work on some roads and they try to get a refund from the federal government. So once there's a better structure, you would see that some local governments will also take that initiative, while the state government can also reimburse them after a while, because the focus will be on development. And as much as we can develop that your vicinity, then there will also be improvement in terms of standard of living and well-being.
Now, Ayodeji, we are gradually wrapping up this conversation, looking at conversations around one state, one product agenda. Now, we know how that is fared in terms of changing the narrative we currently have as at hand and utilizing the human resource and also be it mineral resource, agricultural resource, and much more. But I like the fact they use the case study of agriculture now. We are currently dealing with the food crisis as we speak. Now, food inflation is at double digits. Nigerians are finding it much more difficult to eat. So many people are living below the poverty line. Now, for state governors, one more time, looking at issues of agriculture, health, education. How do we begin to build more robust blueprints once again at regional level so that states are not necessarily working in silos, but we're working in chains, resource sharing, and a whole lot more? How do you see the conversation tilting as we're prepping up for the year 2022? This year is largely gone.
Okay, thanks. I think that we should see more collaboration across the state governments. And you see, like, always refer to this case study of the collaboration between Kebbi State and Lagos State on rice. That was, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago. It's a good example of collaboration that can work, where you agree, you discuss with states, like when you see countries sign agreements with other countries, you discuss with states in terms of what they need, what do they import more. So if you know you can produce those things, you can agree with the state government, and they would offtake some of those items from you. Yes, we've been seeing improvement in the rail system, which we would expect will bring more collaboration in terms of transportation of crops across the country. So we hope that in 2022, for most of the governors would also try to sit down and implement. So why the conversation most times gets really very boring is that most of the state governments know what to do. So it's the willpower to implement. They have robust policy across even the agri sector. They know the crops that they can invest more in. Even the CBN will be happy to even partner with any state that is also very genuine and wants to really expand, because it will also reduce the dependence on the pressure on FX from the CBN angle. So wherever state is willing to invest a lot and expand on a lot of these cash crops that we import a lot and can also add value, that would even reduce insecurity across some of the states, because the underlying factor about insecurity is unemployment. No matter what you spend on insecurity, if you don't tackle unemployment, then it's really going to be like you are throwing money down the drain.
Ayo, we have about 2 minutes to wrap up this conversation now. In terms of painting the best and worst case scenario, when we have this shift in terms of percentages of allocations take a foot, and what do you think would be our best and worst case scenario?
Okay, since tight corner at least to come up to look at the scenario, because for me, my view is that I'm not expecting any major changes, because if you don't handle the underlying factor, you shouldn't expect any major change. You can't continue to do the same thing, same way, and expect a change. But putting it in a scenario based, if the local government, if the state levels, the structure is changed and there's more financial autonomy for the states, this increase of about 3% will really impact, and we would see that improvement in terms of standard of living, and also it will reduce cost of living across within that region for those that implement. And on the worst case scenario, we still see that this is just following the same path that we've been seeing before, and we won't see any major improvement. So it's like also increasing the amount of funds that are available to the state governments.
Thank you very much for your time on the show today, Ayodeji Ebo. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And like so many will say, talk is cheap. It's time to take action at subnational and national, regional levels, continental levels, at all strata. We just have to take action. Enough of talk. Thank you very much once again for your time.
Thanks for having me.